You hit play, and here we are at the Journey Jukebox, a Big Blend radio travel podcast featuring Lisa Evans, a travel writer, photographer, travel advisor, and the author of 100 Things to Do in Coastal Mississippi Before You Die. Welcome, everyone. Lisa is back here to tell us more about her adventures in Canada. And today we're going to get into some of the history, the Indigenous people's history in the area. This is all near we were talking about St. John's last month, and I learned after we published the episode that you do not say St. John's with an ST. It is the full-on saint, so don't mess around. People will yell at you on YouTube. So I'm just going to tell you, I had a big learning curve, but everywhere that we're talking about today has to do with parks and history. So I'm really excited about this. So welcome back, Lisa. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm learning how to spell Canadian.
There you go. You know what? But it's well worth it because when you go there, it's simply a beautiful place to visit. That's for sure.
And this is all what we're talking about today in New Brunswick area, right?
Correct. I spent a week up there, and I got to see so many neat things and just so much history, and met so many really great people. It was wonderful.
That's awesome. I mean, because even, we were talking about, last month about, how the water runs and all this, geoscience, that
Correct.
is just really fascinating. But then you went to like sea caves and this, today we're going to talk about that and all these other kinds of really just interesting parks. And geology is still part of this one too, what we're talking about. So this whole area is like a hotbed for, of history, really, when you think about
Yes.
it, natural history and then human history. So you want to start with the human history because I know you wanted to talk about the First Nations Storytellers.
The First Nations Storytellers. And I didn't know what to expect, but I went on a walking tour with First Nations Storytellers, and the gentleman's name is Dave. And he has such a fascinating story. And basically, the walking tour I went on was just around the city of St. John. And he explained it from the Indigenous people's views and the legends. And of course, if you read in the news the last few years or whatever, there's been some issues between Canada and the Indigenous folks. And I think they've worked it all out, or they're working hard. But his story is simply fascinating because I want to say he's mid-40s maybe. And when he was a child, he literally, like back in the, I don't know, whatever, when he was a child, he was literally taken from his family, his people, because someone somewhere deemed him marginalized. So he basically spent his entire life, his entire youth, young teenager, young adult, up until probably he was like, I'm going to say 40, early 40s. In the Western, in the Western world, Western culture. He was Indigenous. Now, my pronunciation of these words are, and I apologize to anybody that's listening because I'm not going to say I can pronounce them exactly how he did, but his tribe was called the Mi'kmaq. He basically lost all the language. He didn't learn. He was not taught the language. He's not taught the culture. He was not taught the traditions, nothing. He was raised as an adopted child in a Western home. Well, somewhere along the line, he decided, you know what? I want to learn more about my people. And so that's where First Nations Storytellers, he started it basically from scratch. He's learned, just like digging into his history and the people and the Indigenous culture. And it's amazing. I spent 2 hours with this man, and I swear I was fascinated to the point where, normally I'm taking pictures all around me. I think I took 3 pictures. He's so good at storytelling. And he basically, we walked around, and what I had heard from the tourist folks in St. John, I heard from the Indigenous people's side, and he was just wonderful. He told about the story of how last month we talked about the reversing falls and the rapids. Well, there's a legend in the Mi'kmaq, in the First Nations, about how it was formed. And, just as in any legend or whatever, it's all about nature. And so basically, in a quick little nutshell, there was Glooskap is the hero, and he like kind of oversaw the indigenous people, and the river was there was a giant beaver, and the beaver basically built his dam and was, obviously what beavers do, and it was starving the people that live along the river. Because let's face it, the indigenous people, that's, the river was their lifeblood. And so they called upon Glooskap to do something with this beaver. And, again, the whole legend goes, I'm, really nutshelling it here. But basically, Glooskap came along, broke the beaver's dam, and they had this big fight. And that's what causes the reversing rapids and the fall. And when they were fighting this giant beaver, his tail supposedly is the one that carved out, the parts of the river that cause, where geologists say it's because of all the things underneath the water, of how how the water runs. And of course, in indigenous legend, it is because they had this big fight, and, this is what happens when, you fight among nature, and that's how all this is built. And it was obviously, he's a much better storyteller than I am, but he basically, it was just wonderful how he told it. It was just so interesting to see the points within St. John that the indigenous folks called something separate, because there's forts, and you learn the history of the forts from, our side, our being westernized, and then you hear it from the side of the indigenous people. It's really quite interesting. I was enthralled with this whole 2 hours. I just walked around the city down by the waterfront and just listened, and it was wonderful.
That's awesome. To me, like our country here in the United States is turning 250 next year, and there's a big push on that, and it's really important. But at the same time, I go, like, that's not the whole history. We need to look at our indigenous history because it's ancient.
It was here long before we were.
Exactly, and the stories that go through orally. And I know even that's the thing. The storytelling is just gone down from generation to generation, and it's so important to save it and for people to hear it so they learn.
And that's basically what Dave is all about. That's what he is. That's his ultimate goal. He wants people, because let's face it, he was in his 40s and he's rediscovering realistically who he truly is. Because while you were raised as a Westerner, you truly are an indigenous, and you lost all the traditions, all the legends, all the everything. And, just to listen to him and the research he has done, and tracking down, elders and people from that could maybe tell him, but where he came from, and all this and that, and just his learning, and now what he's doing. And I follow him on social media since I visited him. And he also has written a book. And I've followed him on social media since I met him. And now he offers like all these tours. He's won all these awards. He's doing really, really well. And it basically started on a whim. He had worked in a quote unquote normal job, like a corporate job, for years, made his money, lived his life. And then all of a sudden something just said, you know what? I want something more. Or as he tells it, I was missing. I was missing my heritage. And he basically quit his job, started this company, and started this research. And it just literally, and he's such a nice guy. I mean, very soft-spoken, but very, very knowledgeable, and can tell a story. But if you look on their website, they do all kinds of walks. They go to schools and they do story. He does storytelling at schools. It's just, if you're ever in New Brunswick, I mean, that would be the first place I would recommend going. He is just phenomenal.
Wow, it's great to hear, and we love to support small business, and solopreneurs like what he's doing. And he's, doing education, which I think is probably one of the most important things. And that's the thing, as we travel, going with a guide of some sort, even if it's maybe just a local that that's friend or something, but a guide. These kinds of programs really help you, because then you get to know where you're standing, and you have more respect for the place you're in, I think, when you start to understand who lived there, what did they do, what I mean, well, we're all history lovers, right? listening to this and, talking, you and I are definitely into that. When you travel, that just, I don't know, it makes it all, for me. So,
And like I said, just the story, just hearing about and when you stop and think about it, he was literally taken away from his parents. You just because somebody sitting in some office said, "Oh, you know what? He's an indigenous, he's an Indian or a native, whatever they call them. We need to take him out because he's marginalized." And then just like and they literally, I think they called it the 60s scoop or something, and they just basically went in and just took these young kids and, put them in it's heartbreaking when you think about it. I mean, obviously he had a good life. Thankfully, he was obviously adopted by good people and raised well and so good for him on that point. But at the same time, you just took his whole traditions and his whole history away. And, that kind of is what got me a little bit.
yeah,
And
exactly.
he's not bitter. I mean, he's not bitter, which surprised me because I think I may have been. But he's
Yeah.
not bitter. He's just I want to learn and I want to teach others about what I learned.
Yeah, I think that's cool because we have to move forward. We have to learn and go, okay, let's not let this happen again. And that's why history is so important. And this
Yeah.
is something, last time we were talking about, your adventures in St. John, but listen, really don't do an ST. You'll get in trouble. You will. Once they
Yes, yes, it is.
SAINT.
You have to spell out saint.
Yeah, you do. And but I think what was great too, we were talking about how cool it is for kids to go in this do this area as a family destination because kids get to learn, they understand geoscience and geology and that kind of thing when they actually can see things. And I think the same thing for his program for kids. It's going to put history alive if they were, there with you.
Right.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
but yeah, that was really good. Now, another thing, which again, I'm still in the city of St. John, so and then we're gonna go outside to do the other thing. So Partridge Island. I could be in my hotel room. I was in a hotel room where I stayed, and I could look out and I could see Partridge Island. So I think it was my first day there, and we did a kayaking trip because there's only well, when I was there was only one vendor because the island is closed. It's like uninhabited. And there's only one vendor that is approved to, take people out. And so I had a kayaking trip with this, and it was really neat. We left early and we went out and so it doesn't seem like it's very far away, but it's farther than you think when you're kayaking in the fog. And so then you get there and it's uninhabited. Well, Partridge Island, if you look back in the history of things, it was actually used by the Mi'kmaq people. They used it as like a navigation for when you're coming in the river. So that Partridge Island was there. Well, then it became when the British came, it was really a defensive area in the War of 1812. Well, then it became a quarantine station for like, I don't know, over 150, 200 years, I think it was. Because if you stop and think about during the famines in Europe, and when they came over, they used Partridge Island as a quarantine island. So if you came in and, you were ill or whatever, you went that's where they basically shipped you over to Partridge Island, or yeah, over to Partridge Island. So when you go over there, and now it's of course closed. It's a park. It's a national historical. It's on the in Canada, but it's a landmark, and there's really it's all overgrown. But we walked around the whole island, and there's ruins on the island, like where you can see the buildings of what used to be there, and you can see like I don't know, for lack of a better term, the cellars. Like was able to walk down into these ruins of like under the ground and where they kept different people. There is a big, I believe it's a big Celtic cross it's huge. It out in the middle of this island, here's this big cross. And it's just the history. It's like, I don't know, just covered in history. And when you stop and think about the fact that it was a quarantine station. So these people basically that lived on this island were quarantined, sick, died, maybe got better, maybe were able to go back. But it's just, I don't know. It was just really, very interesting to me to go through all these and see all these ruins and see this big Celtic cross that was built there by the people that lived there. And there's still wildlife there. I think I sent you one of the pictures of a great blue heron and gulls that are on the rocky shore. It's eerie, but it's really a very calm. It's, I don't know, how do I say this? It's a calm place, but you can like feel the history, if that makes sense. You can just
Yeah, no,
basically be walking around and feel the history that's sitting on this island.
that to me, that's the whole point, is when you feel it, that's when you start to have that connection to the past, right? So it's kind of like that. It's a spiritual thing. I can't explain it
Yeah.
either. But when you
They
go to
basically
places like that, it
they basically
go ahead.
call it, I mean, if you think of America's Ellis Island, that's kind of Canada's Ellis Island, where you had to stop, and if you were good, you could go on. If you were sick, you stayed there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Wow. Wow. So
Yeah. It was, but it's like I said, there's, I'll bet between the kayak, I'll bet it was a good half. It was probably 4 or 5 hours, in kayaking over because you can't get to it. Obviously there's no road that'll get you there. So we kayaked over, and it was a really nice day. I know that sounds weird for something, when you stop and think about the number of people that likely died there because of whatever illness they had, but then there was some that came back, and just the spirit of people that they built a Celtic cross, for God's sake. I mean, that to me, it just seeps history. So, that's
exactly. Yeah. And the other thing too, this is all people's history, and that's why our parks in the world, around the world, are so important because they preserve history. They preserve the nature and the environment and the history, and they're telling the stories. So important to go to these places to get these stories. Now, you also went to a lot of the provincial parks. So those would be the state parks we have here in the country, which was great. And you went to St. Martin's Sea Caves. I'm dying to hear about, you've got Minister's Island, Partridge Island, the quarantine station. We've got a national park in Hawaii, that it was like a quarantined area for those, living with leprosy. Because at that point
right.
they thought it was contagious, and it wasn't. So these kind of quarantine islands happened a lot. Well,
They
and you've
did.
got to think, I mean, back then, what are you going to do? It's like, dude, go there. I'd like to send a lot of politicians to these quarantine islands,
Yeah, you and me both.
but we won't go there. I just had to throw that out, but I
Yeah.
won't. We'll behave on this show. But yeah, the St. Martin's Sea Caves, what was that like?
Okay. All right. So and again, if you're looking at a map and whatever, and you see about where New Brunswick was, so basically on a couple days out of St. John, and for lack of a better term, you turn right and you go up toward the Sea Caves and Hopewell Rocks, and if you turn left, you go basically down to Beaver Harbor and Minister's Island. So the Sea Caves, I believe the town is called St. Martin, and I went there and I drove myself everywhere on this. I had a car and I was driving, and which is the best way to see it because the landscape and the views are just stunning. So I was headed to the Fundy Trail Parkway, which is basically a road that goes right along the St. John River up toward, going toward like Nova Scotia and all that way. So St. Martin is on the way. So I stopped, and the Sea Caves, let's see how you explain. I mean, it basically there's a restaurant, and I had lunch there, and it was just great, and food was great. But you go out, and depending upon what the time of day is and where the tide is and all this, that, and the other thing will determine how far into the sea caves you can get. And they're stunning. They're huge. You walk across the shore, and when I was there, the tide was out, obviously. I went in the morning, and the tide was basically fully out. And so you're literally walking across the ocean floor to get to these sea caves, and you walk in and you just look up. I mean, I saw like little critters, and you see the shells. It's just, and you're literally walking in, for lack of a better word, muck, because it's the seafloor, it's the ocean floor, and that's how and And so you can literally walk in and all around the sea caves when the tide is out. Obviously, when the tide comes back in, you're not going to be wanting to do
Yeah,
that
you want to get
because
your butt ski out of there.
exactly. So I was there, that was like my first stop one morning after the tide had gone out. And they're red, and you can see if you're looking at the caves, you can see the different material earth, the different, what is the word I'm looking for? The shale and all the different types of earth in this. And you can literally, they're just big caves that you walk in and you look and you can see all these different, scratches and things on the wall. And then there's some there's seaweed you have to walk through because, again, it's underwater, half the time. And so you're literally walking through seaweed. So sometimes that gets that's different, but you can literally walk in these caves, and there's several of them. They're huge, and they're just fascinating, and there's not like there's some big thing at the end, but it's just to look at the nature. And when you're out there and you realize how big they are and that it's all basically a force of nature that's done this, it's
Amazing.
it's awesome. Yeah, it's really is. And just they're just beautiful. And the day I was there, it was kind of a cloudy, overcast day, so it wasn't like bright sunshine or whatever, but it was just that it was, it was. And then I don't know how you walk in them and you look up, and I think I have somewhere a picture of a little critter. I have no idea what it was, that was like in the back of the cave. And then you walk through, and there's several of them. By the time I walked through them and went back, I ended up having an early lunch. And because the Bay of Fundy has the high tide and low tide twice a day, as I'm sitting at having my lunch, you can see where, as the tide comes back in, and people will come out, and or you can't see all the caves because now the tide's coming back in and they're filling up. So it's really interesting when you think about the tidal pools, and how the tide affects everything in this part of the world. It's
cool.
If you're into that, it is. And they're just stunning. And tons of people, they walk around, and it just is something. It's definitely,
It's one of those geological natural wonders of the world,
exactly. So then after I
Very
finished that, then I, headed my way, kept going. And the Fundy Trail Parkway is it's, I guess I would kind of put it like, how the Blue Ridge Parkway goes through the mountains here in the States.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of the same type of thing. And you're driving up and around, and there's pull-offs, and you just stop and you take these beautiful pictures because the views are fabulous. And you end up at Hopewell Rocks, which is another like absolutely fascinating place of geological and formations, and just the way that nature has carved these rocks and the formations of them. And it's so hard to describe. You look at the pictures, and it's like, how is this possible, kind of thing. And it was just, and again, as I was up there, the tide started to change. And so and I think I stayed overnight. I think I went overnight there at a little town called Alma, and then the next day I continued on to Hopewell Rocks, because again, you have to time everything to the tides. You have to be very, very cognizant of when the tides are coming in and going out, because as I'll get to when we go to Minister's Island, if you're stuck out there, guess what? You aren't coming back. You're staying there until the tide changes again. So
amazing.
Everybody there is very cognizant of the tides.
That is, I mean, we were talking about that in the last show too, about the tides rule the world there, and it's something that's different if you're not, and you live at the beach, you're in coastal Mississippi, it's just different. You do tide stuff, maybe if you're fishing and stuff, right?
But it's nothing like, it's nothing like up there. And that was one of the things that I would always say is like, we look at, oh yeah, high tides this time, low tides that time. And, you go on about your business, because realistically it doesn't affect anything unless you're driving along the beach here and, you see the sandbars. Like the full moon was a couple nights ago, the true full moon. And, when it had pulled the tide, it pulled the water out so far that because in the Mississippi Sound, it's so shallow that when the full moon, and of course that was the super moon, so it pulled everything right out. You could have walked out on into the Sound for like, like probably 25, 35, 40 feet and just been on sand because that's how much the pull of the tide was. And it's kind of the same type of thing up there, only like much, much more so, because a full moon up there, I mean, the tides are, every place you go, any place like Hopewell Rocks or Minister's Island or any of these places, they literally have a sign that tells you, like, that they maintain, that tells you the time of the high and the low tide. Because before you go anywhere, such as that, like in the parks or anywhere along that is affected by tides, before you even go there, you want to know how long you have. Because, you may or may not, Minister's Island is the biggest one that I found when I was there. But even at Hopewell Rocks, I was starting a tour and I was walking along with my guide and walking along the beach, and it's quite a decent size area, and so on. I'm walking along and learning all about all this stuff and seeing it. You can walk. Well, on the way back, you can tell you have to walk a little bit farther because the tide's coming back in. So it's
Wow.
interesting that when you're walking one place, the pool, this little pool, for what is mud, and then on your way back, it's not mud anymore.
Amazing.
It is. I learned a lot about tides and how you respect nature and that type of thing when I was in Canada.
That's amazing though, because, it's like, because I think sometimes for some of us, like I love nature. I'm a huge, nature girl. But when it starts in the geology side, my brain kind of gets mushy. Like if you start talking math, I'm really good at math and numbers, but when it comes to trigonometry, I don't even want to hear the word,
Oh, with
I start to shut down, and it's like, because I don't always get it, but like to me, and I know a lot of Indigenous people do have this belief system, especially up in the Alaskan region. And since you're so connected there, I wonder about it, because certain tribes believe that like rocks are not inanimate. Like to me, if
right.
you
Yep.
go up to like a huge cliff or something, or like where you were, and you really kind of hug a rock, like we talking about hug a tree, hug a rock, you
Mhm.
think about the millions of years of what that rock has experienced. And there's an energy. People put crystals around their houses and, all kinds of things for a reason. There's an energy that is within these rocks, within gemstones. I mean, all these beliefs that have been passed down through years with all of this. There's something to it. Let's just put it that way before people start
Right.
going, Lisa, you're absolutely bonkers. Yeah, a little bit. But there is an energy to, I mean, look at the industry of gemstones and jewelry. I mean, people have beliefs over this,
Mm.
birthstones, all of it. So why not? When you're in nature, there's a magnetic thing that happens to me personally with those kinds of things, like the rocks. And I think they're living. I really do. I know they're not, but I do,
Yeah.
and maybe
Well,
one year a scientist will come out and go, Lisa was right.
well, you know what? I know we believe they're inanimate, but how do you know? Because there's other people, like you said, that's how they live their life. They believe in these things. So that's fine. I like to enjoy them, put it that way.
Yeah. I like the idea of possibility, right?
There you go.
I love that. I mean, why not? And to me, it's like, all right, why not? And it's the same thing as people, don't think, animals have brains. I'm like, what? What?
Yeah, right.
What?
That you don't
It,
have an animal.
yeah, well, then now we're going back to that island, back to the island
Well,
concept. But anyway, no. Really, I love these experiences you had up there, and I still want to say the Bay of Fundy. And I know I'm not supposed to, but fun is good, but
yeah,
Fundy.
there you go.
Well, Fundy was a word back in the day. You were a Fundy. Was that an American word? Or is this something from my past and like childhood in Africa? Would say, or a British, it could have been on the British side. We would say, you're a Fundy. It's like an enthusiast. Like if you're a foodie, that means like
Oh,
you're an
yeah.
enthusiast about food. But we would
Yeah.
say a Fundy. Fundy.
An enthusiast for fun. There you go. Hey, works for me.
All right. See, this show is all about possibilities, everybody.
There you
I like
go.
this. Well, travel opens your mind. doesn't it? It does. When you're there, you start to get it. High school stuff that bored you suddenly becomes interesting. That's what happens when you travel.
Trust me, I was not a science girl in school, but I'll tell you what, when I went up there and learned all this stuff, I'm like, maybe I should have paid a better attention. But so now if we go from St. John and we hang a left, so to speak, we're going to go down the other side of the other area of the more toward the west. And now this island is definitely one with the tides. And before I went there, I was trying to figure out how you can have a place, an island that you can only get to twice a day. So when I went up there, I was dying to go here, and it was very, very interesting. So basically, Minister's Island is called, and it's a tidal island. And basically what that means is it's only accessible during low tide. That's the only time you can get on and off this place. So again, I was driving, excuse me. So I'm driving, and literally they tell you what time you can go on. So you could drive up, and I got there early just because I was like, I got to see this. So you can see the island obviously from the road, but the river is right there. So you wait, and I think I got there like purposely maybe like 15 minutes early because I'm like, I don't believe this. Well, guess what? It's true. And so you have this, literally you watch the river. And there's people that are lined up in their cars, and everybody's in a line, and you get out of your car and you're walking around because there's nowhere you can go. And so you're waiting on the side, and your cars are all lined up. And so, and you literally stand there and you watch the tide go out. And like just as soon as that tide leaves, there's a driveway kind of thing or a roadway that you drive or walk. You can walk. There was people walking as well. You basically drive right across the ocean floor. No kidding. And there's this huge estate on Minister's Island. It's called the Van Horn Estate. And the gentleman that built it, Sir William Cornelius Van Horn, for all those, at home keeping score, he was with the Canadian Pacific Railway. And basically he wanted a place, to get away from it all. Well, he bought this island. Obviously lots of money, bought this island. And the little village that you go to, it's called St. Andrews by the Sea. It's such a quaint, charming little town. And then of course you leave St. Andrews and you go to Minister's Island. But we'll go back to St. Andrews in a minute. But anyway, you drove across the floor, the ocean floor, and then you go up to this estate. And this estate is obviously on top of the island, and it is beautiful. And the views, you actually totally understand why this guy wanted it. But again, you can only get on and off this twice a day at low tide. So when the tide goes out, and so you get on it. And so I think it was like that day I went, I say it was like quarter to 10ish or whatever. And so you could stay on the island until, I think you had to be, if you didn't want to stay till like 8:00 at night, you had to be off the island by like 2. And that because by 2:00 the tide comes in and there's no route to get across to this island. So then when the tide goes back out, like 8:00 at night, 9:00 at night, you can leave again. So I was talking to the lady, and I was like, all right, how do you have staff that come here? How do you do their hours or whatever? And so basically what they do is they come out. So they come out with the tour. A couple of them come out. They have like a ferry or something that only the staff can use so they can get across and get the estate ready for visitors. So they either that or they stay there. Like they'll stay, they have a place and they stay right there. So they come out and then they get it ready. Visitors come over, they stay for like 5.5 hours and then they leave. Or if they choose to stay, then they don't get to leave again until whatever, 8-9 o'clock when the tide goes back out. So like they have events, they have weddings, they have all this stuff. So she was explaining to me that sometimes like the wedding party will come out in the morning and then the others will come out right before the access area closes up. So let's say they'll ferry out bride and groom or bride and her party at like 8:00, an hour before the tide. And then the guests come the guests come later and then they stay and then they leave. They've got it down to a science, but it's historical estate. It's beautiful. It's huge. The lawns are just wonderful. They're sprawling. And some of the really cool things is, and you get to go, they have I guess you'd call it a natural swimming pool. So what it is on the lower edge of the islands. So what would happen is, what back in the 80s when the Van Horns lived there, they were very obviously wealthy, and they were very well known for parties and things like that. So they had this pool, I guess you would call it, not like a pool what we think of, but it was dug out. It was a stone pool and it would be filled when the water came in. So that was their swimming pool. You would walk down because it's down into the rocks. The estate sits way up high, so you'd come down and you'd walk, and it would be like a natural pool. And of course now obviously you see where the pool was, but that's what they called. That was how. So it was his bathhouse and a pool. So he was obviously, it was one of the only places that had one of these. So that made it, unique. It was really a very interesting place to visit.
I like this. This is on my list. You're getting me all excited about all these places. So you've got Minister's Island, you've got Partridge Island, Hopewell, and St. Martin's, the Sea Caves. And
the Sea Caves, and then Minister's Island. So St. Andrews, which is the little village. And unfortunately, I was supposed to take a whale watching tour off in St. Andrews, but the winds that we couldn't go out, because I was told that the whales are very, you could like almost pet them. They're right off the boat kind of thing. But the wind and the gusting and things on the water was just too hard. So they didn't take us out. So I didn't get to see that. But the village it's really a cute little quaint village. And they have all these little shops and restaurants. And they have a beautiful garden, it's like a restaurant, but it's like a garden complex. I walked through that because I couldn't go on my whale watching tour. So I walked through that. Beautiful, beautiful flowers. And then, of course, Minister's Island. It's just a really cute little area. I say cute, but it's really a quaint, nice little city outside of the big city of St. John, because it's a ways down. So that's basically in St. Andrews. And then there was another little, and I didn't really have a formal, but somebody told me about it. So I did a little detour because, again, history. It's called Beaver Harbor. And Beaver Harbor is like a true fishing village. What you would imagine a fishing village in your head, and because it's got the rugged coast, and basically their biggest thing is, and it's like a very small little town. It's not anything that's, it's like a little dot on the map, but the people there are like, they're all the rugged fishermen like you would picture, that they make their life. That's how they make their life. But the historical thing is, Beaver Harbor, and I went through this little house that had all this history. It was settled by the Black Loyalists back. It was one of the first like anti-slavery places. It was during that horrible time, and so they basically they were Black Loyalists that found Canada as a safe haven, I guess, for lack of a better term. But they made their living by fishing, and and it's very, if you're into the rugged coastline, like what you would picture, what I picture like out in Oregon and Washington State, that type of thing with the the rugged things. That's kind of what Beaver Harbor is, and you can take a ferry out into it if you're really feeling it. But it's basically a small little village. It's really a unique place just because of the Black history, as well as just the ruggedness, and like a true, honest to goodness, what you would think of as a fishing village.
Cool, man. That's cool. What history. This really is an amazing, this is definitely everyone. I know some of you may be listening from our way back when podcast channel, because this is like the history experience with all this natural beauty and wonder. How cool. How cool. Over the last couple, this episode and last month, We talked about some of the newer side of things, like that one area where all the containers are painted at the port at St. John, and then all the architecture there and everything. But what is lodging like in this area? I mean, is it brand hotels, bed and breakfast? What are the lodging styles
Um,
like for folks to know?
I think it depends upon where you are. When I was in the city of St. John, I stayed in, it was a brand name hotel. It was beautiful. It was lovely. It was, a chain hotel. I had a great view. I was looking out at Partridge Island. It was lovely. When I went to Alma, which is going toward Hopewell Rocks, I stayed in this really cute little B&B. Because if you look up Alma, it's like another little village, and it had a great B&B, and it was very, very comfortable. It has both. It has the hotels. It has the economy hotels, if that's what you're into. It also has a lot of B&Bs.
Okay. Well, there you go. That's nice. Now, what about the food? Because you've had some lunch in some amazing places, and so the scenery is awesome. But what is the food like? What would you say would be like something? Is it mostly seafood since everybody lives by
There's
tides?
There is a lot of seafood. There really is, of course. But I mean, you could get your standard Canadian, whatever your specialties. But I had no problem with food, and the best thing, and I stopped. This is the coolest things. It was on my day that I was out at Ministers Island and Beaver Harbor and in that area. And I didn't have any quote unquote special place where I was going to go to lunch. So I stopped to get gas. And at this gas station, they had this diner. And I was like, hey, I'll just go in and I'll grab something quick, whatever. Well, I'll tell you what, this diner was like, it was attached to a C store. I don't think they call them C stores like I do. But it was, so you had your little gas out front, and then you had like a little C store, and attached to this was a diner. And the food was fabulous. I had this comfort, the comfort food, and it was just one of those. It was what you would consider like a old fashioned diner, and the people sat down and talked to me. Or like, oh, where are you from? You're not from, I got the "you're not from here" kind of thing. But the food was fabulous, and it was this little roadside diner. So you didn't have to be at a 4-star restaurant to get good food at all.
It's awesome. I like that. Well, everyone, as always, we have links in the episode notes for you to plan your adventure there. So we've got, like storytellers for the David. All of that is listed in the episode notes, as well as Lisa's links. So you can get her book, Things to Do in Coastal Mississippi Before You Die. And that's the thing too with that, I have to watch how I say the titles of those books. It's like as though you're going to die there, to watch the title on that.
No,
And
we
we've done
don't
so many.
die here.
Yeah. 100 ways to die in coastal Mississippi. I'm kidding. But that's kind of interesting to me. I would pick up a book with that title, because you want to die somewhere, pretty, you might want to be on a shrimp trawler, right? I just, anyway, everyone, the links are there with the book and also Lisa's website. All of that is there. And our playlist for the Journey at Jukebox is up there, our music playlist. So we've got some Canadian favorites in there. And so you can take a listen from there. Enjoy the music. Every show, we have music from where we're talking about, which is super cool. So, Lisa, again, thank you so much. It's been fun. And I just love this so much of these last 2 episodes because it's such a different coastal, thing from where you are in coastal Mississippi, which we love, and it's beautiful. It's just such a nice, it just shows how different it can be, 2 different places. So awesome. Take care, and we'll talk in December.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thanks for joining us here on Big Blend Radio's Journey Jukebox with travel writer and author and travel advisor Lisa Evans. Keep up with Lisa at writerlisa.com and follow bigblendradio.com for new episodes every 3rd Tuesday.